Welcome to this webinar for World Childless Week 2018 on finding acceptance and moving forward. I'm Jody, the founder of Gateway Women, and I've been invited to host this webinar by Stephanie Phillips, who you will also see is on the call. And Steph, would you be okay just to say a few words about World Childless Week?
I can do. You put me on the spot now. I didn't realise you were doing a chat. It seems crazy, like I said, that I can't believe it's Sunday already. It's like a whirlwind of emotions, of every single kind of emotion, going from happiness, love, acceptance, scared, nervous, upset for others. And it literally is, I hate the phrase, but roller coaster. And I just hope that everybody has found something out of this week that they can take with them. If it's just one comment, one word, one article, then we've achieved what we wanted to do, hopefully. I hope.
Yeah. Well, I think so. And I would agree. It's been an extraordinary week. Yeah. And I've been introduced to so many beautiful pieces of writing and art and things, obviously, this is my work. I spend all my time immersed in this world. And so I kind of thought, I kind of had seen most stuff. And what I love is that there's so many fresh voices that are being invited into this space, for World Childless Week, which is wonderful, as well as, people whose work I know really well. And just the lovely sense of community and cooperation, from those of us, like you and me, who were further along in the journey. Mm-hmm. And also it's really poignant to see those people who are kind of just getting going and are using World Childless Week as their kind of coming out party.
Yes.
Saying their first things, writing their first blog, their first post, mm-hmm. things like that, because, that's when the shift starts to happen, when we start to go, actually, as we say, I am worthy, I am me.
Yeah.
One of the things I say in my work a lot is, I am childless, you are childless, we have done nothing wrong and we are nothing wrong. It's like we don't have any personal shame and there's no but it takes a lot of work until you begin to realize that this load that you're carrying of shame is completely inappropriate.
Yeah, completely. Like you say, childless is a word. It's a word that we can say to other people and they'll understand what we mean. Not always, and there's always sometimes the questions that are prying, but in general they'll get a gist of what that means. But like I keep saying, it doesn't define who we are. It's just a word in the dictionary. Yeah. It's nothing more than that. We ourselves are not childless. Yeah. We are so many things. Yeah. And childless is a little part of us, but it doesn't define who we are. And I hope that a few more people, especially with the I am me photos.
Are so lovely, those pictures. And if anyone watching doesn't know what we're talking about, it's this thing that Cherry Williams and Steph sort of set up for World Childless Week, which is you take a photograph of yourself and then you kind of write on the photo, either, in any way, or even just hold up a picture with the words on it that says kind of what you are, sort of 3 qualities that you are, and then hashtag I am me. And, it's because we are so much more than our childlessness. But, whilst we're going through the process of coming to terms with our childlessness, it kind of defines us for a while. Mm. And then just seeing the variety of pictures that people have done, the places they've done them, the words they've chosen, it's just like the diversity and courage, of our tribe. I'm just,
it shows, I think it sort of almost shows like the rainbow of our personality, that we're not just childless and grey and black over the corner, but every single colour going along and every sort of personality, and we're having fun and finding positives everywhere. And it is really exciting to see each photo. And, in between getting all the articles I've had to read, I'm like, okay, stony-faced, read it, don't get pulled in with the emotions, because I can't before the week, because it's just too much of an overload. And then I suddenly see these photos and it's like, oh my gosh, because it's all these positives coming at me. And it's like, I haven't been able to interact much during the week because I can't, because I have hit my emotional threshold without actually allowing my emotions to come into play. So over the next coming week, I sort of tend to go back and reread everything again. But like you say, I am me has been an amazing, amazing
Yeah,
almost like a revolution.
I can imagine that's going to be a big one for next year, because, as you know, let everyone know that World Childless Week is an annual event, thanks to Steph, and also to Berenice, who I can see is on the call, who is kind of world childless champion supremo. There she is.
I was muting myself and sort of like,
hello.
hello,
hello, loves. So I'm not quite sure how many of us there are on the call. We've had gazillions of people register, but I'm just flicking through. Yeah, it looks like we've got about sort of 20 of us here for now, and there'll probably be some more will turn up as the call progresses. The format that we're going to choose is I'm going to give just a little bit of a talk, and then we're going to kind of have a Q&A. Anyone who has any questions. Any of the champions, the World Childless Week champions who are on the call, are welcome to unmute themselves and join in, kind of helping to answer the Q&As. And because I often find that a bit of a dialogue on screen between us is kind of more productive, perhaps, than, you know, just sort of, you know, just my opinion, because I'm just obviously just one person. And so I get really bored of the subject. Because I do a lot of this kind of video stuff, and I much prefer having a chat with these wonderful women than sitting here looking at my face talking again. So and if you want, you can, at the bottom of the screen, you'll see there's something that says chat. If you click on that, everyone, that will open a little box which you can have anywhere on the screen. You can type in any of your questions for me or any of the other champions, World Childless Week champions there. Hello from Helen. And so, yeah, and you can say hello, and you can type a message just to Steph. So Stephanie Phillips, so you click on the blue down box, put Stephanie Phillips in there. If you want to just send a message to Steph so that she can keep a record of the questions that come up during the call. And then when we get to the Q&A part, she'll be able to sort of, in a way, ask your question to me and to the other champions. So hopefully that's all fairly straightforward. The call is being recorded. I want to let you know that your name, the name that sort of appears underneath your video picture or doesn't appear on the recording. So none of your names will be visible on the recording. Also the chat, anything you put in the chat is not visible on the recording either. So it does stay pretty anonymous. You will only be sort of visible if you unmute yourself or sort of put your video on and say something, then you'll be on the recording. Otherwise than that, you can stay as private as you want, because I do understand that you know, earlier on in our recovery, you know, the idea of being visible can feel really confronting. So this call is about finding acceptance and moving forward, and you know, it's no coincidence it comes on the last day of World Childless Week, because that's really kind of today's theme, and it follows on from, you know, we've been through on a heck of a journey from Monday through, you know, the kind of a big range of experiences of what it means to be childless, and, you know, from some of the incredibly painful ones, like, you know, coping with what other people say, dealing with the word childless, you know, so many aspects. But today is about, well, what's it like when you get to the point when you're okay with your childlessness? How do you get there? What does that feel like? Is that even possible? And I think if I kind of backtrack myself, this is my 9th year of recovery, is how I kind of like to think of it. My 9th year of recovery from childlessness. So my 9th year from the moment that I realized that I definitely never, ever, ever was going to be a biological mum. Now, for me, for each of us, that moment is a different moment. And for some of us, it's a fairly long, drawn-out moment because, you know, you know, there comes a point when it's ended, and that might be a biological moment, it might be a financial moment, it might be an emotional moment, it might be, you know, whatever it is. But there's a before and after moment for all of us. For me, it was a Tuesday afternoon in February, and mine was mine had a very clear timeline. I was standing in this really grotty little studio flat that I'd moved into. It was raining. You know, I'd just broken up from, you know, a very serious relationship, which was the second serious relationship after my divorce. I was 44 and a half. And I just, I knew that even if I were to meet someone and, want to do IVF with that person, I'd need to know them for at least a year before I could even think about it. And I'd be 45. And even with my unbelievably patchy, understanding of my fertility, even I had worked out that would be too late. I didn't know about donor eggs. I'm actually very glad I didn't know, because I know that possibly would have extended my hope, even though I couldn't afford to do IVF on my own. And I had never ever wanted to, me personally, I'd never wanted to try to have a baby on my own. I'd always wanted to have a family. So for me, that moment was a moment that was built up of a number of factors, but it was just like my time was up. And when I got to that moment, first of all, my first experience of it was a really powerful physical experience, which is that I had this feeling, kind of a physical feeling right down in my belly, that these two parts of my life came together. The part of my life that was, there's this one track of thinking, which was everything I was planning and hoping and dreaming and doing towards becoming a mother. Well, I can't take this job because they might not have maternity leave, and I can't go traveling and do this because of that, and I can't be with this guy because he doesn't want to have children, and just this, what I call it kind of psychological nesting. Every decision, every move in my life, in the background of it, I was factoring in becoming a mum, whatever it was. Even if I didn't have even if I wasn't, I'd broken up with my husband, even though I wasn't in a relationship, whatever it was always in the background. It was like a kind of, like a subliminal tape that was always running. Then then there was this other track in my mind of kind of hopes and dreams and plans of kind of my life. And it was as if these two kind of tracks just sort of came together with a really strong physical feeling. I was like, woof. I was like, wow, what was that? And, I went into the kitchen, sort of made my cup of tea, and I was just standing there, sort of looking out the window. And the back of this studio flat looked out over, it's always priceless. There's a school playground, and I'm hearing all the kids playing in the playground. And I'm just thinking, gosh, when I was 20 and I used to look ahead to, to when I would be 50, which I thought was such a long way away. I thought, well, that's a really long time. I can do anything with my life, in that 30 years. And so then I thought, well, why can't I do that with the next 30 years of my life? There's a lot I can do between, 45 and 75. And then the thought after that was the one I think that shocked me, because it was like, when was the last time I had a thought like that? When was the last time I had this expansive, open thought about possibilities for the future that wasn't constantly being checked by this kind of, by the psychological nesting around motherhood? It was as if somehow the brakes came off and I was like, oh, wow, I can do anything. And I'd love to say, although all of you here will understand, that it was short-lived, because by the following morning, I think I fell into a pit of grief the following morning. I woke up, I didn't know what it was. It was 2 years before I discovered that I was grieving two of the most intensely painful years of my life. And those hopeful thoughts of possibility in the future, they were gone. They were gone for a long, long, long time. If anything, I think I lived in an incredibly painful present tense, absolutely suffused with every decision and every moment I'd already lived that had led to the point of not being a mum. It was like I was living in this kind of present moment horror show and haunted by the past. That was what grief felt like. There was no hope. There was no, I wonder if. There was no possibility. And, if that's where you are today, I welcome. I'm really glad you're on the call. I can also imagine that to see where I'm at now, which is in a really great, really positive place, might be quite a mixture, which it might be a quicksture, you know, on part of it's like hopeful, okay, well, that's kind of cool that she's there, maybe I can get there. Another part might be quite confronting, because it's like, well, it's fine for her, I'm never going to get there, you know. And you know, maybe she didn't, you know, maybe she wasn't really grieving like I'm grieving, you know, because it can feel so impossible to imagine. And even I think one can feel quite angry at the idea that you're ever going to feel okay again, because it's like, this is my grief, this is nothing's going to take this away from me. And actually there's part of us that doesn't want it taken away from us, because it's like, this is mine, you know, you get off my grief. I don't want this plan B. I don't want this great new life. I want my plan A, and you can just, you know, you can just F off with, you know, with your wonderful ideas. Because it is, you know, grief is what we have left. You know, grief is what we have left of our children. You know, it is made of the love that, you know, that's what makes grief, is love. It is made of the love that we have for our children. You know, so it takes so much to move through and get to the point and where you are willing, first of all, willing to even consider that you might be able to come through this. And that last bit of grief is really, really hard to let go of. And that last bit of letting go is called acceptance. And we, you know, we're talking about finding acceptance. My experience of acceptance is that it's not a kind of ta-da, I'm fine, everything's great sort of moment. It's a series of moments. And for me, if you imagine that, I like to imagine it as like two piles of pebbles. And, you know, this pile is the grieving pile, and this pile is the acceptance pile. And as you're going through the process of coming to terms with your childlessness, which, you know, is going to take a different amount of time for each of us, you'll find that you're in acceptance of this bit. It's like, oh, I'm okay with that bit now. Oh, I'm sort of okay with that bit now. Because usually what happens is we'll find that we're in a situation that we've been in before. Like we, you know, someone we know will get pregnant. Someone will presume we have children. Someone will make a crass comment about childless women or something like that. Something will happen that's happened to us before that we've been completely undone by. And it happens again, and we notice that we're responding differently to it. And it's like, oh, I'm finding that not as hard as I used to. And to me, that's like a moment of acceptance. So then that one goes on you get a pebble on the acceptance pile. And then gradually, the pile of acceptance gets bigger than the pile of grief. Mind you, I don't want you to think this is a one-way trick, because my experience is some of the pebbles, they go over there, then they come back over there again. Then they go over there. they can hopscotch around. Steph's laughing because you know what I mean. This is not a linear journey. It's like the 5 stages of grief. Someone once said to me, that's great, you know, do you do a 5-week course? It's like, so we can just like move through it and be done. Hi, Debbie. And so there is, you know what I mean, it's a dynamic process. It's going to be moving all the time, but there comes a moment when more is in acceptance than isn't. And the quality of your internal world starts to feel different. And I think what starts to appear are moments of joy. And one of the many really, really difficult experiences of childlessness and of the grief of childlessness is, and so many of us have experienced this, I mean, maybe everyone has, I've never asked if everyone has, is something called anhedonia. Anhedonia is the technical psychotherapeutic term for the inability to feel joy. And it is, it's like everything's in grey. The things that used to bring you pleasure don't anymore. And I felt like I was living in black and white. I would do things that, you know, like my bicycle, for example, which I used to love riding my bicycle around London. It was chained up against the railings of a friend's flat for 2 years. It had vines growing through it, you know, it just through, you know, it was so symbolic. There were vines growing through every part of the bicycle when I went to reclaim it, because simple things that used to bring me pleasure, like going swimming, riding my bicycle around London, having a nice cappuccino, a great film, a good book. None of these things worked for me anymore. You know, I couldn't read. I didn't have the concentration. I couldn't go to films, you know, I certainly couldn't watch, you know, films on the TV. In the cinema, maybe just about manage the concentration, but I had no space in my head for other people's fictional stories. It was like, you know, I think the work my brain was doing, trying to kind of go through the grief process and trying to unravel my past and come to terms with things, I think I was like living in a film. You know, I think my brain was full on the entire time. I just couldn't, I had no space for other people's fictional stories, let alone the fact that, as you know, almost everything ends in a miracle baby story. So that doesn't help either. I was like, I would go to the swimming pool and I'd get as far as the changing rooms, and I'd sort of have my, you know, get to the point where I had my swimming costume on, and I'd already lost enthusiasm for the whole project. You know, just the noise and the damp, and I can't be bothered. You know, and I just end up going to the cafe and eating crisps and chocolate and going. And really the only things that brought me joy during that time, I think pretty well much, were probably red wine and cake, and maybe box sets of science fiction. Most people, very few people know that about me, that I'm actually a real major science fiction nerd. But if I were to write an autobiography of those years, the grieving years, I think I would call them the carbohydrate years. I mean, now, you know, you know, the menopause has kicked in, so now I have that battling against me as well. But some of the weight that, you know, I put on during my grieving years, you know, is starting to come off. And the Germans have a word for it. They call it Kummerspeck, which actually translates as grief bacon. And it's the extra weight you put on from comfort eating whilst you're grieving. So Kummerspeck. So I say, there we are. So it's my little, even though I'm a vegetarian, it's like I've got grief bacon. So I digress. So acceptance is this, you know, this gradual movement towards acceptance, which is made up of many, many different pebbles of acceptance. And that leaves space for the energy of joy to start to appear in our lives. I think for me, one moment I really remember of sort of noticing my ability to feel joy again, and this was, you know, quite a long way into realizing I was through the worst of my grief, was I was walking down my street in London in February. I don't live in London anymore, but I always loved Blossom. You know, that very first, because Blossom comes very, very early, usually before spring. So it's like that very first sign that winter will be starting, you know, winter is ending. But what had been happening in the previous years is that when Blossom would come, I would hate it. Because it would be, I'd sort of say it would be like even the trees were kind of fertile. Just this kind of exuberant display of kind of fertility in the trees. I'd be like, fucking Blossom. Do you know what I mean? I would take spring personally, because, you know, spring is, you know, the season of fertility and rebirth and regrowth. And it was like, it felt like it was a pointed message to me of my infertility and the fact that I hadn't reproduced, and that, you know, there was no potential for rebirth, for renewal in me, that I was, if anything, I felt like autumn and winter, I felt like I was in the autumn and winter of my life, and I found spring really confronting. And then just a few, you know, years ago, I think the blossom came out, and I was like, oh wow, look, the blossom's out, isn't that beautiful? Get my little phone out, take a photo, first blossom, so excited. And then I was like, oh my goodness, another pebble. Do you know what I mean? Because it's like I realized then how much I'd shifted. And so acceptance tends to creep up on you rather than be a sort of ta-da! And I'm just going to read you a little bit from my book. So we have had, there you are, a little bit of promo there, Living the Life Unexpected. And this is from the chapter on the grief of childlessness, and it's just a short passage about acceptance. Oh, acceptance sounds nice, doesn't it? In reality, it's a mixed bag. Because what it means is accepting fully and completely, right down to our very bones, that we will never have children, never be a mother, never be a grandmother. That the millions of years of genetic feats of survival that created us stop here. That when we die more absolutely than someone who knows that they live on in their children. Acceptance is about coming to terms with our destiny and making peace with it. It doesn't mean we like it or that we think it's fair. It just is what it is. It doesn't mean that we won't be sad about how things have worked out, but rather that we are no longer hopeful of any other outcome. And so we stop fighting it, we accept it. Acceptance does not mean that we go quietly. But what it does mean is that the energy that was locked up in our grief becomes available to us again to dedicate towards a new future. Our past and all the wrong turns, twists of fate, decisions made when 5 years old and left unexamined, biological complications, timing misses and misunderstandings that led to our childlessness become less important. We stop raking over them. We forgive ourselves and others involved in the drama, and we move on. We start thinking about what's next rather than what might have been. Grief heals. What was once an open wound is now a scar, and we are ready to face life again on its terms, not ours. We are ready to start thinking about our plan B. And I wrote this book now, 6 years ago, and I've learned a lot since then. And that passage still really, really resonates for me because I'm so much further on in my acceptance now than I was then. And I think for me, acceptance it's a deep peace. It's an end to the what ifs. It's an end to the endless questioning of everything that's gone before. It's a quiet room. Do you know what I mean? It's just peaceful. It's like you get the inside of your head back again. What you then choose to do with that spaciousness is going to be as individual as we would have been, different as mothers. There is no one way forward from this point. And my work, the phrase I created, which is, not my phrase, it's a phrase that's in the language, this idea of a plan B, is, each of us is going to have a very, very different plan B. And we may have many plan Bs. And quite frankly, if I'm on my plan B, it's only because I'm on my second trip through the alphabet. It's like the idea that this was like a really straightforward one. And then it's like, no, I'm constantly changing. And it's my plan B now, the way I choose to live my life as a childless woman now is different to how it was a few years ago. And it's different to how it was when I sort of first came out of my childlessness. And I've noticed Steph has been sort of saying some of the same things around the word childless as I feel, which is there was a time when I felt like, hello, my name's Jody and I'm childless. That was like, it was like the most important thing you needed to know about me. It was the front and center of my identity. Now I feel that my childlessness is behind me. It's here. It's along with, I'm a writer, I'm an only child, I'm British, I'm this, I'm that, it's like, it is part of the context of who I am. My identity as a person, my grief, has enabled me to grow as a person. And my grief is still there. I mean, it's no longer painful, but it's still there. But I'm bigger than it now. It's like my identity has grown, and it now includes my childlessness. My childlessness is not the most important thing about me anymore. And quite frankly, if it wasn't my calling, to help other childless women through this pain, I actually wouldn't think about it anymore. It's quite extraordinary. It would not occur. I wouldn't think about it from morning till night. It wouldn't occur to me. Because it's not a live topic for me anymore. It's part of who I am. You know, I'm a vegetarian. I love animals. I'm childless. You know, I studied English. I'm passionate about writing. You know, I hate people who drop litter. I'm childless. You know, it's like it's like the I am me. It's one of the things about me. I wouldn't have thought, even just 3 years ago, I wouldn't have thought that that was possible. But it keeps changing. I mean, every year in spring, you know, when the blossom would come out and I'd see how I responded to it. I used to use that as a moment to kind of check back in with myself as a sort of measuring stick to see where I was in my recovery. And over the last probably 4 or 5 years, each year I've thought, well, this is it. This is as best as it can't get any better than this. You know, I can't feel any better than this. Isn't this amazing? I'm so fortunate. I wouldn't have thought it was possible, but here I am. And then the next year, there would be another improvement. And then the most recent one, which I still feel a little bit kind of awkward about saying it, which is I think I feel as at peace with my childlessness as if I had chosen it, which is extraordinary. I didn't think that, I really didn't think that was possible. There's part of me that doubts it. There's part of me that wonders if maybe I'm in denial and it's going to come and bite me on the arse at some point. But, you know, it's like, that is incredible. You know, it doesn't, you know, when I look back now over my life, if I had the choice again to be a mum, I still would. But I do not see that the life that I'm having is any less than the life I would have had as a mum. It's a different version. It's like motherhood would have been a messy, imperfect human experience. This is a different version of a messy, imperfect human experience. It's not better, it's not worse. It's not a booby prize, you know. And it also doesn't have to be extraordinary. And I think that's something that's so common, that as part of our journey when we're working towards acceptance in our plan B, is this idea that somehow we've got to do something extraordinary with our lives because we're not mothers. And I really question that. Why? You know, why? I mean, I get it because I went through it. I mean, I was going to give away all my possessions. I was going to move to Laos, which is a place in, it's next to Cambodia. And I was going to sort of live in this orphanage on the Mekong Delta and spend my life with these orphans. And then when I died, I was going to be on this amazing funeral pyre and float down the Mekong River, you know, on fire. And there would be this little passage in the South Sea China News about this extraordinary, eccentric English woman who lived her life with these orphans. And then one day, as I was lost in this fantasy thinking about it, I realized that I wasn't really thinking about the children at all. It was an entirely narcissistic fantasy. Really, I blame the king and I for this one. It was really about my grief. It was about wanting to do something in two ways. I wanted to do something huge so that people could see my pain, so they would understand. This is how much she wanted children. This is how much she hurts, that she will give up everything, you know, for you to see it. And because nobody could see it, nobody would let me talk about it. Nobody would witness or honor this pain, you know. And when I came out of, you know, realizing it was a fantasy, and I've told that story before, I didn't expect to be so moved, but that's, you know, that's our story, you know, is that I began to really question what had been motivating me to have this extraordinary fantasy. And I thought, if that's what I think I have to do to feel worthy as a woman compared to having children, being a mother, how overvalued has motherhood become? What the hell is going on? Because when I was growing up in the 70s, I was born in 64, so my childhood years, in a way, the ones I really remember are kind of, you know, the early 70s. And it's like motherhood wasn't exalted. and venerated. You know, it was something women did. It wasn't particularly sexy. It certainly wasn't an accomplishment. And if any of our heroines or film stars or pop stars got pregnant, it was really uncool. And actually, they usually had to drop out of the limelight and disappear until they'd had their baby. And some of the, you know, it was not a cool thing to do to become mum. And so it's like that, these kinds of things gradually, I mean, all of this stuff is in my book because I really started to think about the fetishization of motherhood. And, you know, as a feminist myself, starting to thinking about what is going on here around our value as women, that suddenly it's all about motherhood. And, you know, it's really interesting because I do think that this backlash, this kind of overvaluing of motherhood, I'm not saying motherhood's not valuable, by the way, I'm just saying this kind of cultural overvaluing of motherhood is a bit of a kind of a sort of a social pushback, a kind of a mechanism to really push back against the massive changes that have happened in our cultural life in my lifetime because of sort of women's empowerment. I mean, there hasn't been such a big change in how women live their lives, probably, you know, in one generation, you know, probably ever. I mean, it is quite extraordinary. In my lifetime, we've had the introduction of the pill, the introduction of legalized and safe abortion, women's access to higher education, women's access to the professions, and fertility treatments in one generation. It has completely changed everything. And I think that, you know, what happens in society when we have such a massive change at once is usually what happens is there is a sort of pushback and then things settle in a new place. Then we come back from the pushback and we settle in a new place. And so I think that some of this overvaluing of motherhood and massive undervaluing of childless women and shame of childless women is part of this very complex thing that's happening right now. Now, that's all very well from a kind of airy-fairy intellectual point of view. When you're in it, it's very hard to see it. It's very hard to understand that you're part of a social moment. I mean, there will be a word for us and for this generation, for our experience in the history books. You know, we're actually living a really important historical moment, but there will be a name for us. I mean, I call us the shock absorber generation for the sexual revolution. There'll be something a lot catchier. I don't know what, you know, the Elizabethans didn't know they were the Elizabethans. You know, it's like, there will be a name for us. And I very much hope that it will not be the name that the women of the 1920s who were childless were called. They were called the surplus women. Those were those women who were born around 1900, and many of their partners or potential partners or actual partners were killed in the trenches in the First World War. And many others were unable to afford to marry in the 20s and 30s because of the Great Depression. So it's like that's what the number of childless women in the culture right now mirrors that time. And they were known as the surplus women. And if you're interested in finding out more, Virginia Nicholson has written an extraordinary book about single childless women of that period, which is called Singled Out. They were, and you know, we have been here before, but they didn't have the internet. They didn't have a way to connect with each other. And many of those women were also uneducated and had a really, really tough time because really they expected to be married and bringing up families for their life. They were not equipped to earn their own living in the working world as we are. So acceptance, there's the internal acceptance, you know, when we kind of start to make peace with the very unique qualities of our own life. And then there's starting to accept our place in society. And also, I think, starting to accept that we're not going to accept our place in society. That the kind of the package that's been given to us, that we're going to be these sad spinsters or these crazy cat ladies or these career women. Never met one of those, by the way. I only know women with jobs, never met a career woman. You know, all of these things that we don't actually have to fit those stereotypes. So I'm just going to put my glasses on, my nice sensible middle-aged ladies glasses, and I see that the time has chugged on. So I'm going to stop talking now. I've seen that the chat screen has been buzzing away, but I haven't been able to see it. So I'm going to ask Steph to come back onto the call and maybe share a few of the questions.
Thank you so much, Jody. It was really interesting to hear your sort of perspective on things, and some of the actual storylines. The way it was like, yes, I agree with that. I can see that, and I think that's what you've related to a lot of people, because they're all saying, I recognise that, I can relate to that, I understand that. And I think that is one of the biggest messages to get out there, that what you are thinking and feeling, it isn't weird, it isn't unusual, it's completely normal and it's completely acceptable. And I think that's the big thing with when you join a support circle anywhere, that's what people validate for you. You suddenly start to realise you're not this strange thing sitting in the corner.
A weeping weirdo is one quote.
Yeah.
That's what, on the whole, that's what prevents women from coming to Gay Women workshops or meetups or whatever, because they imagine, they have this internalized idea of childless women, which they then project onto the other women that they haven't met yet. And they said, but they'll just be a bunch of weeping weirdos. It's so sad. And then they get there and they discover it's us.
Yeah.
And we're just human. We're just
people.
Yeah.
We're just people, and we're going through exactly the same emotions, or we've gone through them so we can relate to them. And I think, like you say, that's the difference, is like, you can't relate necessarily to parents because they haven't gone through the same emotions. They're going through their own trials and tribulations as being parents, which are completely different to ours. And you've got to find the people who understand you, because otherwise, if you mix with the wrong people, you do feel like the outcast and as though you are strange.
Yeah.
But you're not when you find, like you say, when you find your tribe.
Yeah.
And I think that's what everybody here is relating to what you're saying, some of the things. And I also think about the cherry blossom, saying that you've got stuff that you relate with, a memory that sort of sticks in your head. And for me personally, I actually forget dates. I intentionally don't remember dates because I don't want to remember the negative dates. I don't see, but I know that's not an easy thing to do for a lot of people. And the thing you said about how you know you've moved forward when you can look back and realise something didn't hurt you this year that it did hurt you before.
Yeah.
I think that's a really important thing, because people say, when will I stop hurting? When? And it's not this week, it's not next week, it might not even be next year. But you'll be in a situation where you suddenly go, that was fun, and then you think, hang on a minute, 12 months ago I'd have walked out the room crying. And that's when you start to realise you're healing, but nobody can take you there. You've got to get there yourself.
And that's when one of those little pebbles moves and you're like, oh, I've got another one on that pile now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfectly. No, I think the pebble scenario is a really good way of explaining it to people. It does go back and forward.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. He's not very quick. Yeah, I don't think, to be honest with you, we had any direct questions, because everybody was just listening so much to what you've been saying and agreeing with it. And I think that's the biggest message, in a way, is that we understand each other.
Yeah. Well, that's brilliant. I mean, in that case, I mean, Berenice, do you want to come onto the call for a chat?
Hang on. Hi. Sorry. I was struggling with buttons, and I'm also keeping an eye on our Facebook page as well. And I'm like, ooh. Yeah. Anyway, I
mean, what does acceptance and moving forwards mean to you?
I very much felt the same about the blossom. I actually had exactly the same thing with my garden and with my everything. So how dare this happen? This is just not right. Damn you. And it's marking of seasons. And I know that we've spoken before on Facebook, away from all of this, about that I have this thing called, and I spoke about it very briefly on my Facebook Live yesterday, about synesthesia. And it's a thing where in my head, it's a thing where I can see kind of dates, markers in the year, and it sort of sits somewhere around here. And that was always, and still has been, very, very hard for me to kind of rid myself of that, or try and manage that in a way that I wasn't always focusing on the negative. And I found that the way that I have to do that is really to kind of dot my days or my calendar with other more important things, interesting things. And World Childless Week is a very much a positive thing, that owning Christmas, and we've spoken about this a couple of times in the last couple of days on World Childless Week, and about owning something and taking it and saying, okay, this is fine. People will cope with stuff that you throw at them. They have to learn to accept those things in the way that we have to kind of cope with the fact people do the baby scan pictures on Facebook and all of the crap we have to cope with. I think it's okay to say, actually, no, I'm not coming to this. I'm not doing that. And that in turn makes you feel a bit stronger you feel a bit better about being able to say that no is okay. And I think that's how I find acceptance works for me, is that by being part of a community, by meeting you, by meeting Steph, by getting out there and talking to people who are in the same position, all the different ways we get to it, and there's so many different routes to all of this. I only know a handful of people who share my route. I should have more people that have different paths, but we all have very similar things in common. And it's okay to sense check it as well. I think if you think, oh, well, actually, is that all right? I'm okay with that. You know, and often I'll sense check stuff with Steph, you know, and we have different backgrounds in where we've come to, but we'll have a chat about something and just say, well, actually, is that kind of weird or is that not weird? You know, and that makes you stronger. And none of these feelings are unusual. Someone somewhere out there will feel the same. And again, the other thing that you said about resonated with me was about wanting to make a statement about your grief. I see it so often with people out there doing other things in the community, but people I've seen in groups, and it's this, I've got to make the biggest noise, and I've got to do this, and it's how I've got to do it. And actually, that's a very complex and personal emotion. I know that when I first started doing Walk in Our Shoes, and I know that when I stood up in the front of everybody at the university, it was to make a statement and say, actually, this bloody fucking hurts, and I want to say this, and I want to do this to shock everybody. And it wasn't necessarily for the right reasons at that time. It is now, but right then, 6 years ago, yeah, I was angry. I was really mad. So I see a lot of that. We've got a lot in common. We all have. It's not unusual at all. I feel like I want to sing it Tom Jones now.
Making a statement. I think that's really important, because that feeds into something I get asked a lot about, sort of plan B. You know, it's like it's like I've got this really big idea for a plan B, which is often a thing, a business, a move of some kind, or I don't have a plan B. I'm never going to have a plan B. You know, what's going to happen to me, kind of thing. And I think that often shows I understand that need, but I think that a plan B doesn't have to be a thing. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be one thing. It can be many different things. And it's also, to go back to the pebble analogy, it's also about, a quote from Rainbow Roll from a book. And it's like, what if it what it's about putting things on your pile of good things and watching your pile of good things grow. And it's that sense of that it, an ordinary life, but where you are at peace as a childless woman inside yourself, is already extraordinary. We don't have anything to prove. I mean, if you're happy with the way your life looks and the people who are in it and what you do and how you express yourself, you don't have to change it, just to kind of have a plan B. There might be a desire to change it because of what we were talking about, that kind of need to make something visible. But I think although it doesn't have to look different on the outside, I do think that your life on the inside has to look different. I think the work of being a happy, at peace, childless woman is an inside job. And because of we're living through such an extraordinarily pro-natalist moment, as I was talking about, the fetishization of motherhood, because absolutely everything is about being a mum, being a parent. We're bombarded with this stuff, all the time. And that's how a woman has value. I think the work we have to do inside to counteract that brainwashing, that's big work. So I think the work often is on the inside rather than the outside. But I think at the early stages of our recovery and acceptance, we can imagine that it's about doing something differently out there. But I think the work is here. For me, there's someone on the call, I can see her, Debbie Norman, and she's just had her story written up in Woman and Home magazine, and it's like, it's about how important self-compassion is. Finding our side, doing our grief work, and learning to be kind to ourselves, because if we believe the cruel and shaming messages the society currently has, predominantly about childless women, we will be destroyed.
Mm. It's good. I've actually had one question come up, which in a way you've sort of just talked and discussed about. And the lady actually says, I'm very much struggling with the need to achieve something amazing and huge to prove my worth because I'm not a mother. Can you advise how to start in picking this, please? And the first thing to me is, why does it have to be amazing? Why does it have to be huge? It just has to be something little that is important to you.
Mm.
Because I certainly didn't start World Childless Week knowing it was going to go where it's going. I sort of in my head completely believed it was going to be a disaster, but it obviously wasn't, and it's back again, and I'm still in shock that it's back again and it's becoming big. But I think sometimes it's just the smallest of things, the idea can lead to something big for somebody else. And I always say, like, you share your story anonymously, you don't know who's reading that, and that's your big thing.
Mm.
And it only takes one reader to make that big and amazing difference in life, but you might not know about it.
True.
They might know about it, but you don't. Do you know what I mean? So I don't know if you want to expand on that at all, Jody, at all.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I would sort of almost go backwards slightly and start to think about what are my motivations? Why? And that's what I started questioning. Why do I feel the need to do something extraordinary? You know, what's motivating that? And on the whole, what's underneath that is, you know, complex. Mine was, I felt so invisible because of my shame. My grief felt invisible. But underneath that, I realized I felt ashamed. I felt less of a human being than I would, you know, of less value as a human being than I would have been if I'd been a mother. So for me, the work really is also is behind the actions. It's actually unpacking the messages that society is giving us that tell us that, you know, that we are not worthy. It's actually doing, you know, starting to develop our worthiness again. And I think from the work, the internal work we do, you know, normalizing our experience by being around other childless women and realizing that we're not judging them. We don't think they're failures. We don't think they're less than, you know, we start to realize through listening and empathizing with other women, actually, she's kind of extraordinary. Well, she's kind of amazing. And you think, but she's got some elements in her story that are like mine, but I'm not slamming her for it. So why am I slamming myself? So it's gradually this process of recognition through others that we're being incredibly hard on ourselves. And as we start to let that go, there's this, I call it the inner bitch, this constant shaming monologue that tells us that everything we do, everything we say is wrong, and that all we've done is made mistakes, and so it's our own fault that we're in such a mess. You know what I mean? This horrible, horrible, ultra critical inner voice. Learning to soften that with self-compassion, questioning the judgments in society that tell us we're not valuable. That's really, really important inner work. I do sort of explore that in my book. It's in the Gateway Women workshops, and you'll get a lot, you know, there's lots. It's very powerful work. When you have done a bit of work on that area, you will probably notice that the way you want to express yourself in the world, i.e. the things you want to do, starts to change. I mean, I run this year-long program, which is kind of the Plan B mentorship program. And when women start this program, they're usually in two positions. Now, they have a really clear idea for their Plan B, or they say, I don't have a Plan B and I'm worried I'll never have one. Usually by the end of the year, the ones who've started with a really clear idea, they're doing something else. And the ones who've said that they don't have an idea have a much clearer idea, because it's an outward expression of inward change. On the whole, most of us, either think about or have done what I call is a Plan B project. And it's actually a worthiness project. We've done something that we think is going to make us look good as a way to kind of cover up how we feel about ourselves as childless women. You know, we've changed careers, we've moved countries, we've retrained, we've done some big project. And, you know, and then we realize that actually we don't actually feel any different inside. And that's because the inside work really, really, really needs to inform whatever change happens in your life. And actually, when you feel in touch with your integral worthiness as a human being again, I mean, you were born worthy, you know, that cannot be taken. Every human being is born worthy. You don't have to do anything to earn it. But we do have to unpack and clear away the debris of parental messages and societal messages to get back to that place. That is our work as childless women. Mothers have different work to do, and many of them may have to do this work when their children leave home. And you never know, our friends at that stage may look to us for the wisdom that we've gained. So I hope that helps.
It's good, actually, because again, you sort of reflected on the survey that I did. And I shared some of the results yesterday for the We Are Worthy questions. And I asked people to rate themselves from 0 to 10 of how worthy they felt. And there were some in the middle and some at the end. There's not many towards the 8s, 9s, 10s. So I asked them to explain why they felt they were worthy or unworthy. I'd probably say 90% of the answers were I'm unworthy because I haven't had a child. Which, to be honest, it's what we expect, sort of in a way, from the answer. Yeah. I then asked people to look at somebody else who was childless and write down the personality traits or qualities of that person that they thought made that person worthy. And it suddenly changed, and nobody mentioned the fact that they were childless. They started to show they were compassionate, they're friendly, they're this, they're that, and they were all positive, reaffirming words. So then I asked the question, now please tell me why you are worthy. And all of a sudden people reflected the words that you could see in somebody else, but they hadn't originally been able to see in themselves. And I asked them to grade themselves again, and all of a sudden all the 8s and 9s and 10s were getting a lot higher than what they are. So it's, as you say, it's looking at yourself sometimes from the outwards when you've worked on, and working on the insides that combine together, and it's just not seeing that label again.
Sometimes we need a better mirror, don't we?
Yeah, it is. It's reflecting what other people see, not what we see. Because if you're sitting across the room from a stranger, they don't go, well, look at that person, they're childless. They'll go, look at that person, they're smiling, they're laughing, they're having a giggle, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that's what we forget to do when we look at ourselves sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, we believe those internal judgments, which are often internalized societal judgments.
Yeah.
And really bear no relation to the women we are. Absolutely. Definitely. Well, I'm noticing that we are 3 minutes from the end. So I just wondered, Christina's on the call, another World Childless Week champion. If you wave at me, Christina, if you want to actually come on the call. Yeah. I've unmuted you.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah. So how has World Childless Week been for you and in your country?
Well, it's been an amazing experience for me, and I mean, everything that's been said totally resonates with me. I was amazed by reading, and I haven't read everything that was shared, but I've read a lot of it, and I was absolutely amazed by how much of this experience reflects mine. And you know, even if I've talked to many childless women, and I know that our experience is not only unique to us, but still, I was still amazed by see how much in common we have. Yeah. And so for me, it's been amazing. Unfortunately, here in Norway, there is absolutely no visibility of childlessness, not my choice. And that's why I'm working on it to try and change things. And yes, in fact, organized an event earlier this year. We're organizing another event next year. And so I'm really glad to be able to be part of this community. And it's great how such great friendships are coming out of this community as well. I mean, people have been corresponding for years, like, for example, Robin Hadley, who's not here. But yeah, and how even these friendships, they are beyond the barriers of gender even. I mean, even when the men speak, I'm amazed at how much of what they say reflects what I feel. So I think we're all in the same situation, and I cannot, I don't have enough words to say how important it is actually to share the experiences, because it's really through this sharing that I am rebuilding my own story. Basically, I am rewriting it. There was a very beautiful song that was shared this week by Chiara Berardelli. And there was a line in there that said, I have found a place where I can rewrite the story with grace. And I thought, this is for me, yeah, the lines that really summarize this week. And this is the place where I can find new words, new lines to actually rewrite the story in a way that makes my life more meaningful, actually. And so, I can't say how grateful I am to be with you now and to have spent a week with everyone.
Well, that's wonderful, and thank you for coming onto the call. And just a word of encouragement: when I started my blog Gateway Women 7.5 years ago, there was really very little awareness in the UK for childless not by choice women. There was More to Life, which was a small group which for women and couples post unsuccessful fertility treatments, and that was it. There wasn't anything else, and there was nothing written about us in the media and things like that. And look what it's just exploded in 7 years, and here we are now with our very own World Childless Week, 2nd year running. So it's just brilliant. So thank you for the, it's another small country, so in a way, in small countries we can have quite a big impact, just small voices. So I look forward to supporting you with that. So we've come to the end of the call. I'm gonna leave the call and end the recording, but the call will stay open for anyone who wants to stay and chat for about another 10 minutes. And then I'm actually going on to another call, part of my my Plan B training program. So I'll have to end it then because I'll need my Zoom account back, but it's open for about another 10 minutes. So Steph, do you want to close the call?
I just want to say thank you to you, Jody, for doing this for us, because you are the face that I think most of us recognise.
Oh, Lord.
No, but I do think that a lot of us look towards you because you started this a few years ago. And the rest of us sort of like are starting to creep out now. But like you say, we're getting quite strong in the UK, which is fantastic to see. And I think, we're small, but if all these small countries link together, we're a jigsaw that's getting bigger and bigger.
Brilliant.
What people will always hear. So thank you so much for doing it today and being part of World Childless Week. It's really appreciated. It's
been an absolute honour and a blast actually being part of World Childless Week, and I've got so many ideas for next year.
Yay!
Okay.
Once you suck it in, you'll never give up. Your brain goes. Thank you.
Right, then. So I'm going to leave the meeting and the call will stay open for another 10 minutes. So thank you so much, everyone. And the recording will be available through World Childless Week. So bye.
Bye.